The forest had always been my escape. Whenever life felt too loud, too chaotic, I would hike through the old trails behind my house. There was something calming about the way the trees stretched high above me, their canopies swaying gently in the wind. The crisp scent of pine, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. It was familiar, safe. But that day, the forest was different. It was too quiet. The usual sounds of birds, rustling leaves, and distant wildlife were gone. I didn't notice it at first. Not until I wandered deeper, past the familiar trails, past the old fallen logs I used as landmarks. It was only then, when the trees grew denser, darker, that I realized how unnatural the silence had become. And that's when I saw it. A door. It stood alone in the clearing. No walls, no building, just a massive wooden door planted firmly in the earth like it had been there for centuries. My footsteps slowed as I took in the sight. It was old, too old, the wood dark and cracked with time. Vines curled around its edges, creeping up like fingers grasping for something unseen. But the strangest part? It was perfectly upright, standing on its own. There was no frame, no hinges attached to anything, just a door standing in the middle of nowhere, and it shouldn't have been there. I swallowed hard, my breath visible in the sudden chill that had settled around me. The air felt heavier, the kind of pressure that makes your ears pop, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I took a cautious step forward. As I got closer, I noticed carvings etched into the wood. Strange, twisting symbols covered the entire surface, patterns I couldn't recognize. Some looked like letters from an ancient language. Others were shapes that hurt my eyes the longer I stared at them. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the carvings. A voice in the back of my head whispered, "Don't touch it." I hesitated. Then, the wind stopped. The entire forest fell into a complete, unnatural stillness. No rustling leaves, no distant creaks of swaying branches. Just silence, like the world was waiting. I pulled my hand back, a sudden, overwhelming dread settling in my chest. Something about this wasn't right. I should turn back. I should go home. But before I could move, a sound echoed through the clearing, a deep, slow knock from inside the door. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. My mouth went dry. There was no way that had just happened. Another knock, louder this time. I stared at the door, my breath shallow. Someone was inside. Number, not someone, something. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't know what to do. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Then, the handle turned. I spun on my heel and ran. I didn't stop until I was back on the familiar trail, my lungs burning from the cold air. My house wasn't far now, just a little farther. I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. The clearing was gone, like it had never existed. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the door had been real, and I knew, without a doubt, whatever was behind it had heard me, and it wasn't done with me yet. I made it home just as the sun dipped below the horizon. My legs ached from running, my breath still ragged. I slammed the door behind me, locking it out of instinct. Even inside my house, where I was supposed to feel safe, I didn't. I kept expecting to hear another knock, but the house was silent. I tried to shake the feeling off. It was just a door, a weird, out-of-place, impossible door in the middle of the forest, but still, just a door. And yet, I couldn't get it out of my head. The knock, the carvings, the way the handle had turned on its own. I told myself I would forget about it. I wouldn't go back. But some things don't let you forget. Some things wait for you. That night, I dreamed of the door. I was back in the clearing, standing in front of it. The carvings on the wood shifted, twisting into symbols that made my head ache. The handle was turning again, but this time I didn't run. I reached out. The moment my fingers touched the surface, a whisper right against my ear. "Let us out." I woke up gasping. The room was freezing. My blankets were twisted around me, my skin damp with sweat. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. It was just a dream. Just a dream. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My bedroom window was open. A sharp gust of cold air blew in, making the curtains flutter like ghostly hands. I sat up, my pulse slamming against my ribs. I hadn't opened the window. I climbed out of bed, crossing the room on unsteady legs. My hands shook as I reached for the window frame, ready to slam it shut. But then, something caught my eye. On the glass, scratched into the surface like claw marks, a single word: "Come back." I didn't sleep after that. I sat awake, staring at the window, waiting for the sun to rise. Every noise in the house made my skin crawl. I should have left it alone. I should have never gone near that door. But now, it was calling me back, and some stupid, reckless part of me wanted to answer. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going back. I needed to see if the door was still there. I needed to know if I had imagined it all. I packed a flashlight, a knife, because it made me feel safer, and a notebook. If I saw anything, I would write it down. Prove to myself that this wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. I set out toward the forest, my stomach a tight knot of nerves. The deeper I went, the colder it got. It wasn't normal. The sun was shining, but the temperature kept dropping with every step. By the time I reached the clearing, my breath fogged in the air. And then I saw it. The door was still there, waiting, like it had never left, like it knew I would come back. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing. My body screamed at me to turn around, to walk away. But I didn't. I stepped forward. The door loomed ahead, its carvings pulsing faintly, like something inside was breathing. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the surface. The wood was freezing cold, like touching ice. A low hum filled the air. The symbols on the door glowed faintly. And then, a knock. Loud. Urgent. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The knocking grew faster, more desperate. Something wanted out. I should have run. I should have never touched the handle. But I did. My fingers curled around the cold metal, and before I could stop myself, I turned it. The moment the door creaked open, everything changed. The forest behind me vanished. I wasn't outside anymore. I had stepped into something else, a place that shouldn't exist. The ground beneath me wasn't dirt. It was smooth, like stone, but it felt wrong, as if it were shifting just beneath my feet. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. And the worst part? The door was gone. I turned in circles, heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, and I wasn't alone. The door was gone. 1 second, I had been in the forest, standing at the threshold, my fingers gripping the ice-cold handle. The next, I was here, wherever here was. The ground beneath my feet wasn't earth anymore. It was something else, smooth like stone but alive, shifting slightly when I moved. The air was thick, damp, and wrong, carrying the scent of something old, something forgotten. The sky, if it even was a sky, was a sickly shade of gray, like the world was trapped in an eternal dusk. No sun, no stars, just a vast, empty nothingness stretching in all directions. And then there were the trees. They looked like trees at first, tall, twisted things with gnarled limbs reaching toward the sky. But the more I stared, the more I realized they were breathing. The bark shifted, expanding and contracting like lungs. The branches trembled as if they were alive. I took a shaky step forward, my boots making a dull sound against the unnatural ground. The second my foot landed, a whisper slithered through the air. "He's here." I froze. The whisper hadn't come from one voice, it had come from many. My entire body screamed at me to turn back, to run. But there was nowhere to go. The door, the only way back, was gone. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Think. There had to be a way out. I scanned the area, searching for anything that looked like an exit. The landscape stretched endlessly, broken only by the shifting, breathing trees. But then, in the distance, barely visible through the thick air, I saw something. A light. It flickered faintly, deep within the forest of those twisted, living trees. I hesitated. Going toward it felt like a mistake. But staying here, trapped in this nowhere place, that was worse. I had to move. I had to try. The deeper I walked, the worse it got. The trees weren't just breathing anymore, they were watching. I could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back, the air growing thicker with each step. The whispers returned, curling around me like fingers. "He doesn't belong here. He opened the door. Now he must stay." I ignored them. I forced myself forward, keeping my eyes locked on the flickering light ahead. But then, I heard footsteps, not my own. Something was following me. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my grip. The trees swayed slightly, their trunk-like limbs twitching, but nothing was there. Just the shadows. The empty, shifting shadows. I turned back toward the light, walking faster now. It was closer than before, pulsing faintly in the distance. But as I got near, my stomach twisted. It wasn't a light, it was a door. Another one, just like the one in the forest. Standing alone, surrounded by the living trees. But this one was different. This one was open. I slowed to a stop, my breath uneven. The inside of the door was pure darkness, a void that swallowed everything beyond it. I stepped closer, but no matter how much I strained my eyes, I couldn't see what was on the other side. And then something stepped out. A figure. Tall. Wrong. Its limbs were too long, its body shifting in and out of focus like a glitch in reality. Its face, if it even had one, was featureless, just a smooth expanse of black. But the worst part? It knew me. I felt it. The recognition. The thing tilted its head, watching me. Then, it moved. I ran. I didn't think. I just turned and bolted. The trees twisted around me, their limbs stretching, shifting, trying to block my path. I dodged between them, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers rose, a chorus of voices laughing, hissing, calling my name. The footsteps behind me grew louder. It was getting closer. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Then, I saw it. A third door, slightly open, a chance. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, throwing myself through the gap just as something cold and clawed grabbed my wrist. Pain shot up my arm, but I twisted, yanking myself free. I hit the ground hard, my vision blurring. And then, I was back. I gasped, the cold, real air filling my lungs. I was in the forest again, kneeling in the dirt. The familiar scent of pine surrounded me, the late afternoon light filtering through the leaves. The door stood before me, closed, silent, but my wrist burned. I lifted my hand, heart hammering in my chest. My skin was marked, a dark bruise shaped like fingers. I scrambled away from the door, my entire body trembling. This wasn't over. I hadn't escaped. I had only brought something back. I sat on the forest floor, gasping for breath, my hands digging into the cold dirt. The door was closed again, but I knew that didn't mean I was safe. My wrist burned. I lifted it, staring at the dark, finger-shaped bruise forming against my skin. It was impossible. There was no way that thing had touched me, no way it had followed me back. And yet, I could feel it. Something was still here, watching, waiting. The forest was too quiet again. No birds, no rustling branches, no wind, just silence, like the world was holding its breath. I needed to leave. Now I pushed myself up on shaky legs, stumbling toward the trail. My house wasn't far. I just had to get home, lock the doors, and try to forget any of this ever happened. But as I walked, a sick feeling settled in my stomach. The trees, they were different. I had walked this trail 100 times before. I knew every fallen log, every twist in the path. But now, it all felt wrong. The trees were taller than I remembered. Their trunks were wider, stretching high above me like twisted pillars. And the worst part? They weren't where they should be. I swallowed hard, forcing my shaken legs forward. Maybe I was just disoriented. Maybe I had run farther than I thought. Maybe... Snap. A branch cracked somewhere behind me. I froze. The sound was close. Too close. Slowly, I turned my head. Nothing. Just the trees. Tall, unmoving, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. And then I saw it. A shadow between the trees. A figure standing impossibly still, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't need to. I knew what it was. It had followed me back. I took a shaky step backward. The figure didn't move, but the trees did. The branches twitched, their long limbs stretching ever so slightly. Reaching. I ran. The forest shifted around me. The trail was gone. The familiar path that should have led home had disappeared, swallowed by trees that weren't there before. I was trapped. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. My vision blurred, my breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. Then, a whisper. He's not supposed to be here. I spun, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The figure was closer now. I couldn't see it move, couldn't hear its steps, but it was there, closer than before. And then I saw the door, a new one, standing between the trees. The carvings on its surface glowed faintly, pulsing like something was alive beneath the wood. I didn't want to go near it, but I didn't have a choice. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices curling through the air. Go back. It's waiting. You don't belong here. The door was open, and beyond it, darkness. Not just a lack of light, something deeper, something that felt like falling forever. A void, a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I turned back. The figure was gone, but the trees, they had moved. They surrounded me now, closer, taller, blocking every way but one. I had no choice. I had to go through. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stepped toward the door. The whispers turned frantic, voices pleading now. Don't open it. You can't leave. It won't let you. I reached for the handle. My fingers curled around the cold metal. And then, something grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around, swinging blindly. Nothing was there. But the moment I turned back to the door, it was closed. The whispers stopped. The trees stood still again. And the forest was normal. I was back. I collapsed to my knees, my chest heaving. It was over. The door was gone. But deep inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't really gone. It was just waiting. And next time, I might not escape. I didn't know how long I sat there, kneeling on the forest floor, struggling to catch my breath. My whole body trembled, my mind still trying to process what had just happened. The door was gone. The trees had stopped moving. The whispers had vanished. It felt like the forest had finally let me go. But I didn't trust it. Not yet. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me. My house wasn't far. If I could just make it back. Lock the doors, close the windows, pretend none of this happened. Maybe it would stay gone. Maybe I would be safe. So I ran. The trail felt endless. My boots pounded against the dirt, the familiar landscape of the woods rushing past me. But I didn't slow down, didn't stop, not until I finally saw it, my house. The sight of it nearly brought me to my knees. I sprinted toward the front door, fumbling with my keys. My hands were still shaking, slick with sweat, but after a few desperate tries, I finally jammed the key into the lock. I shoved the door open, rushed inside, and slammed it shut behind me. Click, locked. I leaned against the door, gasping, listening to the silence around me. Nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no shifting trees pressing against the windows. It was over. Right? I dragged myself upstairs, exhaustion hitting me like a truck. I barely made it to my bedroom before collapsing onto the bed, my body aching, my mind still reeling. Just sleep, I told myself. Just forget. But the moment my eyes shut, I dreamed of the door again. It stood in the middle of my bedroom, slightly open, the darkness beyond it stretching out like an endless abyss. The whispers were back. You let it see you. You brought it home. It knows where you sleep. I snapped awake. The room was dark, quiet. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face, trying to shake the nightmare away. But then, I heard it, a sound that sent pure terror through my veins. A knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps, coming from inside the house. My entire body froze. It was impossible. The front door was locked. The windows were shut. I wasn't alone. I reached for my flashlight, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath came in short, shaky gasps as I climbed out of bed, forcing myself to move. The hallway stretched before me, empty and silent. The knock came again. This time, I knew exactly where it was coming from. The basement. I should have called someone, should have left the house immediately. But some twisted part of me needed to know, needed to see. I crept down the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The air grew colder, heavier, the closer I got to the basement door. The moment I reached it, the knocking stopped. The silence was worse. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, I reached for the handle. It was ice cold. I turned it, and the door swung open on its own. The basement was pitch black, the kind of dark that felt alive, pressing against my skin, pulling me in. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. The light landed on the concrete floor, the old shelves, the rusted pipes along the ceiling. Everything was normal, except for one thing: a door, standing alone in the middle of the basement. The exact same door from the forest, with the exact same carvings. Only this time, it was wide open, and something was standing inside, watching me. I ran. I didn't think. I just turned and sprinted up the stairs. I could hear something behind me, moving fast, its footsteps echoing against the concrete. The air rushed past me, filled with frantic whispers, voices overlapping and screaming my name. I threw myself out of the basement, slamming the door shut. The whispers stopped. The air grew still. But I knew I had made a mistake, because when I looked down, When I saw the small, dusty imprint of a footprint on the wooden floor, I realized something had followed me out. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. I boarded up the basement, covered the door with heavy furniture. But it didn't matter, because I knew the truth now. The door was never in one place. It didn't belong to the forest or the basement. It belonged to me, and wherever I went, it would follow. It's been a week. I've barely left the house, barely slept, barely eaten. But tonight, I heard it again. The knocking. Not from the basement, not from the front door. This time, it was coming from inside my closet. And when I turned to look, the door was already open, waiting.